Let's talk also a little bit about how its architecture and its use of REST makes it particularly interesting and flexible and useful. And if any of you, particularly the folks who are new to the world of development, you've always wondered, oh, what's so great about REST? I think this is a really great example of how really sticking to a solid REST architecture for your application can be useful. So data set initially, when you first use it, is a database query thing. It's like any number of things that let you type in SQL or, you know, view lists of tables from your database. It's a good one. You can click on a thing and drill into the thing. It'll do things like faceting. So if I want to be able to sort of look at the table by executive, then I can click on that and choose facet, and then you get a list of the executives and you can see each of them. So it's a really nice flexible tool for looking at data, which is what it's for, right? Has a query interface like you'd expect. Yeah. But what's also interesting about it is that it has been around for long enough and enough people have cottoned onto it that it's got a really nice ecosystem around it. So, well, actually, first, I skipped something. Anything you can see, you can export in any sort of format you might care to with great flexibility. And then you can use plugins to do things like clustering of your data. It has 50, 100 plugins or something to do all sorts of different things. Mapping, Vega, which is a sort of dashboard presentation tool, authentication and authorization, geocoding, text search, statistics. You can export to a Jupyter notebook, or you can embed Jupyter notebooks. It'll do GraphQL. I'll talk about that a little more in a minute. You can make dashboards some other ways, and then you can export to things like fly.io. Talk about that in a sec as well. Vector search, if you're all hot with AI. Now, who isn't? It'll read and generate Atom feeds. It'll understand iCal. There's just all sorts of things. And the plugins are fairly easy to write if you know Python. Python's not hard to learn. What's really interesting about it and takes this tool to a whole new level is that it's very REST oriented. Its architecture is very, very solid REST design. If you want to learn how to do a good REST app, get a hold of this and start playing with it because it's really neat. So you can introspect, everything you can see is driven by the sort of REST layer behind it. So you can introspect, you can sort of pull up lists of all the databases and all the tables and things that it has available. Anything you see, you can put .json at the end of and get a nice JSON version of it. Everything that you do is packed into the URL. There's nothing that's passed in the cookie or anything else. So any URL you can see, you can copy and give to someone, assuming they've got the domain name right, and they can see the same thing you were looking at. It has built-in tools that will package up the, I should start out with, this is for SQLite databases. So you can package up the application and the SQLite database or databases. You can connect up to 10 files. And sort of hit one button almost once you've set in the credentials and publish it to all sorts of different places. And then you can customize it. It's really nicely engineered so that you can customize what it looks like and what it's doing. So if you want to, so the kind of thing that I think this is, well, one thing that it would be really useful for is you've got clients and you have some of their data and they'd like to be able to look at it. All you have to do is be able to dump that to an SQLite database, and then you can give them a nice query interface where they can do statistics and everything else, and you can brand it so it looks like your website. So you can set up all the sort of stuff that's in the user interface is all driven by metadata files. You can customize the database, the individual tables, things like what sort of units fields are in. You can tell it that you want it to bring in CSS and JavaScript files into every page, that you can then run stuff and customize it further. The templates that it uses to draw the user interface are done using a templating language for Python called Ginger. It's a lot like ERB. And those templates you can customize at the level of the site, the page, the row, the query, and you can also serve up static files from it. So the kinds of things that you can do with it is client reporting, but also prototyping or developing for small businesses. Something that you want to get stood up in a hurry that's useful, right? So you can create a database and have people have a user interface and they can query it. It's not designed for data entry, but there are ways of doing that. One thing is you could point a small Rails app at the same SQLite file. You can also can SQLite queries that you can then send arguments into, and those could run updates. There's a plugin that'll give you an instant GraphQL API for it as on top of the regular REST API that it has. So you can just take your data, stand it up in an application, and you have an API ready to go. You can use it, you can manipulate it, it's got authorization, it's all pretty neat. And there's another project called Dog Sheep that's worth knowing about, even if you're not going to use dataset. What this is all about giving you ways of accessing your personal information, things like your Twitter feed, your health kit, anyone who's an Apple user and tracks their running or whatever. Swarm, which is a check-in thing, Apple Notes. These are all just simple little utilities that you can run, and they will grab various sorts of data about your GitHub repos and dump them into a SQLite database. So then you can just open them in Dataset or whatever other tool you like and get at them. Yeah, that's it. Any questions?
What do you personally use Dataset for?
I am not using it. I just found it recently, but I've had a long-had interest in finding development tools that let you solve problems for really small businesses. Most of the tools that we have, including Rails and so on, are really designed for standing up large-scale things where you hand roll every lovely little part of it and test, write tests that are, 17,000 tests and run it on thousands of clients. But I've worked for a lot of projects where I had a company that had 10 employees and they needed a way to track some stuff that the people want to record in the field and they can look at it. With a tool like this, I could stand up the data structure I need to record their information and have a user interface for accessing it. And I can access it from another application through its REST or GraphQL APIs. And then all I've got to do is make the application that they've got on their handheld or their laptop that can send a request into that same application. So I found it because I'm always looking for things like that. And it's really impressive. And if you just want to see a really lovely bit of engineering for a REST application, take a look at it. Yep. Yes, sir.
So that looks a lot similar to like the DuckDB REST API Streamlit stack. How would you compare those two?
Not familiar with Duck.
If you're using Postgres, it's going to be way nicer than SQLite.
So I am familiar with Superbase, which is sort of maybe along the same sort of lines. I don't know.
You should check it out. I think
DuckDB.
DuckDB is the database, and it's the competitor to SQLite, but it's actually really nice, and it directly connects to Postgres. If you have like a giant Postgres database, you can just feed directly into DuckDB and use it as a cache, and then you have exactly the same idea where you have an encapsulated database that can run locally. The downside is you don't have concurrency, so you don't want to use it as a main database.
Right.
If you're doing a situation like work where you have only one client and your goal, and you can quickly get from Postgres. And then
does it give you the same sort of query interface and GraphQL API?
you should totally check it out, dude. This is yeah.
Oh, I love tools like
so,
that.
A database, and then you write a REST API with a fast API, and then the user interface with Streamlit, and it's sweet. Like, you should check it out. If you like that, you would really like that stack.
Very good. Anybody else know of any tools like that we should? All right.
The Ruby on Rails podcast, I think it was a couple episodes behind, but I listened to it today, that basically they were making, the guest was making an argument that, you tend to default to a Postgres database anytime you spin up a Rails app, but like most of the time you don't need to, or maybe not most, but there's often times when you don't need to, and the SQL out of the box has a lot of advantages because it's built in and adds a lot of like easy features or like better debugging tools on Roku instances and things like that. So.
Yeah, and you can run a multi-user SQLite database. There's a number of products that turn SQLite into a client-server database. Bedrock DB is the one I'm most familiar with. So you can start with SQLite and scale it up big. Yeah. The company Expensify, I don't know if anyone's used their Expensify, which is a very popular thing for scanning and recording your expenses and getting them paid. They run everything off a SQLite database. And they've got scale and load. Yeah.
That allows you to, does anybody know the gem? That allows you to do this kind of full query of the database. You can essentially assemble a query and get back a full result set from any table.
You mean so that gives you a out-of-the-box user interface for querying? I think Active Admin maybe does that, right?
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah. There's also a Rails gem that is made for doing like custom SQL-based reports. So it creates a basically a SQL interface in your Rails app as an admin page.
You type in select star.
Yeah, and it'll give you results. I have it in Slack somewhere. I can pull it up real fast.
There's a bunch of little niceties. Sorry.
So what's that?
It's by the folks at Instacart.
There's a lot of little niceties with dataset I didn't go into. I figured I should give you an idea of what it is and how I think you might find it interesting to use it beyond what's obvious, and then you can go and look yourself. But it does things like whenever you're doing the graphical user interface query, you can see what the SQL is going to be. It's got GIS features. Metabase is another one I got to check out.
Get your homework cut out for you.
Yeah, right.
It seems like it's a GUI interface for particular dashboards and such. But other people usually just finds out what database tables you got.
You can deploy this as part of the Rails stack. Do you want a web client, or do you want any UI that uses those?
Do you want just like a web client where they can say select star from the table? Just use Stream or Superset, whatever. Superset, that's what you want.
Looks like DuckDB bills itself as an analytic database.
It's like SQLite, but it's more like Postgres. It's got cool connectors. It's really nice, actually, if you want like a cache. Like, I don't even use Redis anymore. How do you deploy your apps? You just like, how are these deployed in containers somewhere?
The dataset app, when you install it, can generate a container. It can deploy straight to things like Heroku, Fly.io, Google has a thing, AWS has a thing.
Does it have its own authentication? You have to roll the client
It'll just duplicate what you've got now. Oh, one thing that does that's cool also is can take whatever the whole packages that you're running at the moment and compile it to WASM and then just run it in the browser. It's really kind of amazing. Everyone know what WASM? Thing that'll, it's the new way of running code in the browser that isn't JavaScript. So it's kind of like Java. It's a virtual machine like Java, but you can use any programming language that can compile to it. Ruby compiles to it now, and you can run it in the browser.
Anyway, Alan, this thing, Blazor, I think might be what you're talking about, is a gem that you can use to literally create a SQL reporting engine. I believe it doesn't allow writes, which is a good idea.
Yeah.
But you still probably want to put a bunch of an interface.
Thanks, Karen.
But the security